Dios te salve María, llena eres de gracia, el Señor es contigo. Bendita tú eres entre todas las mujeres, y bendito es el fruto de tu vientre, Jesús.
The advent of Spanish colonial rule on Cuba at the beginning of the 16th century was accompanied by an equally important influx of religious congregations. The Dominican and Franciscan missionaries soon established schools and hospitals, as well as a number of churches. By 1728, Havana had a Catholic university, and 40 years later a seminary. Subsequent centuries saw the authority of the church grow to where the Cuban elite grew concerned about the church's political influence. Cuba's regime under President-elect Fulgencio Batista responded by introducing secular policies and adapting the country's constitution to limit the church's power. Notwithstanding these changes, the church still enjoyed popular authority and a certain degree of religious freedom.
At
one time, the Catholic Church was the only church on Cuba, the only one with its own religious and educational institutions, a great promoter of cultural and educational development throughout the island. That is how and why the Catholic faith became rooted in our culture, in our genuine Cuban culture.
Despite the restrictions, Cuba experienced a period of religious renewal in 1959 with the island-wide pilgrimage of the statue of Our Blessed Lady of El Cobre. Batista took part in all the religious ceremonies, including the erection of a 33-meter statue of Christ as a sign of unity between state and church. This, however, did not reflect the church hierarchy's attitude towards Batista because of his anti-Catholic stance. The figurine of Our Lady of El Cobre arrived in Havana on the day that the oppressive Batista regime was overthrown by Fidel Castro. Consequently, the church saw the revolution as a gift from Providence. The Catholic hierarchy only set the alarm bells ringing once the execution of the first so-called war criminals, in fact opponents of the revolution, began, and the first steps towards nationalizing land and school reform were taken. The church officially condemned communism for the first time in 1960. Castro's response was to withhold church access to the mass media. A year later, with the revolution having officially adopted Marxist doctrine, a wave of religious expulsions began, forcing all foreign monks and priests to leave Cuba. Finally, all church schools and hospitals were nationalized, and acute repressions of the faithful began.
I became a qualified teacher in 1964, but could only practice my profession for 4 years, as in 1968 I was dismissed for declaring that I was a practicing Catholic. Many other teachers were thrown out with me. Before 1959, the church blossomed, and its spiritual life was very rich. After 59, the opposite happened. Places of worship became empty, and the only people that attended in large numbers were what we called grey hairs, old people.
That was the result of the hostile attitude towards the faith that we were experiencing. We were subjected to political pressures. The young were told that if they attended church, they would not be able to continue their studies, whilst workers were informed that attendance could damage their job prospects. Fear was ever present.
Repressions ranged from subtle coercion to outright destruction. Hundreds of churches were symbolically ruined or desecrated, with many a church property converted to non-religious purposes.
There were chapels in some villages that were lost. They were taken over for other purposes, educational, medical, and sometimes they even became dance halls. And we can't get them returned.
With the triumphs of the 1959 revolution, our Comandante took away our faith and closed the gates of our churches. This was a very beautiful church. The first wedding was celebrated here in 1947, and the last on December the 13th, 1959. Today there is a terrible sadness and great poverty. But I believe that once this church is rebuilt, happiness will, as before, once again return to our community. We have a great need for a church. This was a Catholic community, and we want to see our church once again, for we are convinced that we have faith and believe that happiness will return and poverty will cease to trouble us so.
The Church, as the only independent voice with popular authority, more than ever presents the greatest threat to Castro's regime. Consequently, the policy of destroying places of worship has been augmented by a concerted effort to limit the Church's pastoral work. Foreign missionaries have great difficulty obtaining visas, and access to the country is severely limited. Contacts with the religious communities and seminaries are controlled and the number of seminarians restricted. The result is a Church frustrated and unable to respond to great pastoral needs.
I haven't created new parishes because under the present circumstances, that is not possible. Parishes stretch over large areas, with many chapels served by one priest. Some of these churches, that we call chapels, stand in towns with populations from 15 to 20,000 people. This number of priests is clearly insufficient for such large populations.
Because the church is in such a terrible state of repair, catechism classes take place here every Sunday at 9 a.m. Children and adults take part, and on every last Wednesday of the month, Holy Mass is celebrated here, under the open sky, and we must be satisfied with that. Everything is changing. People have great faith and they want their children to be baptized. Recently there were 15 baptisms celebrated by Father Albert. Parents ask me every day, when will they come to baptize again? They want to educate their children, to have them submit to God, to become better educated every day. Today the children know nothing. They don't know what Christmas is or anything about the Three Kings. They receive no toys, they know nothing.
In parallel with attacks on the Catholic Church, there has been a return to so-called traditional religions on Cuba, religions deeply rooted in African voodoo customs. Historically, these traditional religions have intertwined and fused with elements of the Catholic faith, the resulting confusion called syncretism.
A variety of ethnic groups immigrated, almost 20 different groups, and they all brought their religious beliefs with them. Later, these Africans mixed themselves with the church. Why? Because the colonial power forbade them to practice their own religion. This was the time on Cuba that black slaves applied en masse to be baptized, not because of their belief in baptism, but rather to be able to continue practicing their own religion. That was the beginning of syncretism on Cuba. It is like a religion, Our Lady of Cobre. This is a saint that we have in our religion, that we worship here. We light a candle or a cigar, and this is so-called el agua. We usually say that he is the Lord of the ways, that he opens our ways. He opens your way, he gives you good luck, he helps you. We give him sweets, we give him rum, tobacco, flowers. This is the African black woman. The African black woman who is like a saint from Africa, who is also a saint that we worship, whom we beg as one begs God. We pray to God every day. We beg him and we believe in God. But you are not Catholics, are you? No, we aren't Catholics.
Typically, Cubans who practice syncretic beliefs celebrate the Orija deity Babalu Aye on the feast day of St. Lazarus, or the deity of energy and fire Ciego on St. Barbara's feast day. This syncretism of superstition and religious beliefs leads to Catholic feast days such as this on St. Lazarus being celebrated with greater exuberance than has shown Christ on Christmas Day.
Drum beats always start at the beginning of the night. They begin to play, above all else, to invoke, call the one who has to begin the ceremony, so-called elegua. Once elegua has come, it is only then that Ciego can descend, assuming, of course, that the ceremony is devoted to revering Saint Barbara. Ciego takes possession of one of the people who are present there. In any case, the individual possessed by Ciego, Babalu, or any other deity will behave in a manner that is characteristic for the particular Oricha. If it's Ciego, then he will come in the guise of a warrior, and the person will experience violent convulsions and be thrown against the ground. If it's Babalu, the person will bend in half and foam at the mouth, mimicking Babalu's behavior exactly. I realized that to a large degree, this was the result of a form of autosuggestion.
Catholic clergy are not present at these Santeri celebrations. Exceptionally, a nun or priest is invited, offering a unique opportunity to minister to the entranced.
There have been cases where people had fallen into a trance, and I, who am not a Santera, released them. Such a person would then get up and be like you or me are now. Recently in Regla, I was involved in releasing a certain woman from the influence and domination of a Yemania. I had to physically pull her away from the altar and remove the spell.
Although Santeri creates confusion, by far the most dangerous phenomena remains Palo Monte, a belief of the Bantu tribe. Originally from equatorial Africa, it is practiced by witch doctors so-called brujos.
El brujo works with the devil. This is a great mystery for me. I have only had one opportunity to visit what is called Paulo's room, and the things I saw there were just terrible, horrendous. There are amongst them people who practice this religion, people possessed by the devil, for real.
The Castro regime sought to further undermine the Catholic Church by openly promoting traditional religions. Diabolically successful, the policy not only further confused Cuba's faithful, but also skillfully turned these traditional religions into a booming tourist industry.
The reason for all this confusion is the result of government policy aimed at attracting tourists and making tourism more appealing. Some people started to practice this religion for money. They give the government a cut and keep the rest for themselves.
Despite the poverty, persecution and confusion, Cuban Catholics continue to remain faithful, with the Church witnessing increasing numbers of believers returning to their Catholic faith. The culmination of this renewal was Pope John Paul II's visit to the island, a historical turning point for the country and its people, a breath of freedom, a yearning briefly fulfilled, what to that moment had been impossible to walk out on the streets in the name of the faith in Jesus Christ became a reality.
The Pope's visit was something the Cuban people waited for over many years. His coming with his message of peace, hope, unity, I believe that this nation, so wounded, will never forget. It was a time during which people came closer to the church and suddenly lost some fear.
Cuba, amigo, el Papa está contigo.
We have great hopes that the faith will become ever more present, that it will become a faith born of learning. As it is, people do have faith, but they need a catechism. In other words, we have done what Jesus told us. Go, we have gone. Now we have to teach, and that is a continuous labor.
Si desea llevar una existencia digna y decorosa, propia de su condición. Para ello, el único camino es Jesús.
Despite the desire to respond to the Pope's exhortation and encouragement, deep structural and human problems hinder progress. The overwhelming poverty is such that neither the Cuban faithful nor the Church have the means to rebuild damaged places of worship. Reconstruction slowly and painstakingly becoming possible thanks to the generosity of the Catholic faithful around the world.
We are concentrating our efforts in 3 areas: evangelism, to catechize lay people, as well as nuns and seminarians, and on reconstruction, repair, and the maintenance of buildings. This gives the Church the opportunity to create dignified surroundings in which to celebrate Holy Mass, a case in point being the Church of Santa Cecilia. We sent money there some time ago, and just a few days ago received notification that, happily, planning permission to rebuild the church has been granted. Quite simply, we survive thanks to the help of Aid to the Church in Need and other organizations. The faithful share the little they have, and that, in spite of the poverty, is the foundation. But without doubt, we could not move forward without the help of brother churches.
If the seeds of faith that have been sown bring an abundant crop, they do so in no small measure thanks to the dedication of the clergy and of the laity working together. Crippled by a lack of infrastructure and priests, the Church must rely on lay missionaries to communicate the Word of God.
I am alone, and therefore much of the ministry work must inevitably depend on support of missionaries. I can't visit 11 places every week, but this community has a great missionary zeal. They are very aware that they are the mother community of this whole region. There are many villages that have no churches, so we gather in private houses, usually once a week, either with me or a lay missionary. On one occasion, a missionary knocked on a door. He was asked inside, and as soon began to talk about Christ, about God's love, and then suddenly, and this is a true story, the particular person said, "Please come with me into the kitchen." Do you see that rope hanging from that joist? I knotted that rope, and when you knocked, I was just about to hang myself.
Both my husband and I have certain functions within the church, mainly to help families, to help them find their dignity as such, to help them discover their calling as families within society and as part of the church, but above all else to help them discover that they carry freedom, something that is God-given to all human beings, something that they must ensure that no one or nothing is allowed to take away from them.
Debemos de dejárnoslas arrebatar por nadie ni por nada.
Tenemos grupos de misioneros.
We have groups of missionaries leaving every week. Some find their own means, for others we arrange transport as and when we can. They go to far, out-of-the-way places, into the mountains and onto the plains, and all the time to found new communities and to care for them. Christians gather in someone's home that has been made available to teach catechism. Towards the end of the week, a priest will come to baptize or perform other rites, and so we gradually try to make his home a new place of worship, a kind of missionary house, so that though they are a community without a church, they can still practice their faith. They always ask for a priest to be there to receive the sacraments, and above all to teach them to pray and bring them the Bible. That is what they ask for most. Nevertheless, they often do not have a venue to perform those religious ceremonies.
Where she works best in relieving human suffering, the Church has been denied access except to those who are already deemed irretrievable. The presence of nuns is exceptionally tolerated, but only in some hospitals.
Muchas madres.
I have many mothers that have done for me what my own mother, alas, could not do. That is why they are all most important to me, for no one has done as much for me as them. They are very good to us, sensitive. They advise us. They lead us down the road of goodness. For I was, as they say, a lost sheep.
They attend to our individual needs. As to the nurses and doctors, they are not sacrificing themselves for us through love.
Despite the rebirth of faith, the evidence service to the population, and the historic papal visit, there has not yet been any noticeable improvement in the government's attitude towards the Church and its faithful. In fact, if anything, controls are more exacting, particularly of the young, which the state regards as the next generation of revolutionaries.
They check it all, and personal problems are irrelevant, all the more so your religious beliefs. Often they work in subtle ways, arranging timetables that fill the hours that fall before midday on Sunday, when people usually go to church. All this does not only apply to our year. Younger children are also enticed by parties and dances they like, and that are organized to attract their attention. I've done my 2 years of obligatory military service. It's something more terrible than can be expressed, but that's the past and gone. I went into the army as a Catholic, and I suffered because of it. I was picked on, and they were provocative. They used to say, "Didn't Jesus come forward to be slapped on one cheek and then on the other? Come here." I would answer, "If anyone but touches me, there will be trouble." As a Catholic, I had to be very careful as to how I behaved, because I was representing the Church. Officers were another matter, though, because of their rank and status. At times they humiliated me to such a degree that my anger would make me cry. I had a mother, so I couldn't allow myself to respond, because I would be sent to prison for sure, and that would be my end. I was like a marionette.
In spite of the constant flow of state-sponsored persecutions, growing numbers of people, particularly the young, are confounding all expectations by finding solace and new meaning to their lives in the Church of Christ.
Creo que con los jóvenes es más notable.
As far as the faith of the young is concerned, I believe this to be very telling, because it is amazing that it is the young, brought up in an atheist society, those who have the least number of reasons for being in the church. Their schooling was atheist, and that aside, their faith was then openly condemned. It is truly the work of the Holy Spirit.
I
think it was 2 bishops who arrived on Cuba from Latin America. On leaving, one of them said, "I give the church on Cuba another 5 years of life." Over 30 years have passed from that moment, and instead of dying, the opposite is happening. The church is constantly being reborn anew.
Guantanamera,